I started reading your book. I'm only 43 pages in out of the 214 that you've got. So I apologize that I wasn't able to finish it before we had this conversation. And I don't want to, I don't want to speak definitively about it since I've only read, 15, 20%, whatever that ends up being. Yeah, I've got some thoughts about how reading your book is influencing my work. More so than here's what you should do to fix your book. Like, that's not a thing. I will not be giving you that. I also had some pretty strange revelations about my own work in the past, and I'm full disclosure, I am in a rut right now. I'm in a very deep trough of self-loathing. With respect with respect to writing, not with respect to anything else. I mean, home life is going great. The family's doing well. My job is pumping, and the Uplink Underground Games is doing really great. We've got a huge event at the Pro Football Hall of Fame next month that I'm really excited about. So like everything else is firing on all cylinders, but it's almost like an awareness of just how wrong I've been about me and my ability. I feel like I've been focusing on the wrong stuff. So yeah, should be a fun conversation.
Great. All right, let's get into it.
Yeah.
But how?
I guess
how do we start talking about each other's self-loathing? I mean, gosh.
Yeah, because what happens if I agree with you or you agree with me, right? Oh, I suck. Oh, yeah, you do, Art. Yeah, you're pretty terrible.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just trying to be supportive.
And your novel, geez, 43 pages. Ugh, I could just get. Oh God.
That's right. I'm just trying to be helpful.
It's a real page turner. Every time I turn a page, I'm just like, oh, more of this.
Well, why don't we do? Oh man, yeah, that could turn into a therapy session. Let's start this way. I am disappointed in my prior work, and I want to tell you why, and then you can kind of help me maybe work through that, or just let me know if that's ever happened to you. So I had kind of a moment when I wrote The Last Refill, and The Last Refill was really about, what you used to try to do, Art, is innovate. And you used to be really interested in literary form, and you were sort of dialed in on what you were trying to do. And over the course of about 4 or 5 years, I had figured out how I wanted to express myself. Even though I wasn't still fully capable to do a great job at it, I had developed a style and a sensibility that was uniquely my own. I remember people that I went to school with would read my prose and they could tell, 1 or 2 sentences in who had written it. And so I always held that as a badge of honor. Like, oh, people know my work without consideration of the subject matter or anything else. Like that, I have a voice. And now the stuff that I'm writing also has a very strong voice, but it's very baked in realism. And what I have found is that I am writing this stuff recognizing that I probably wouldn't pick it up off the shelf if I were thumbing through books at Barnes & Noble trying to decide what to read. The stuff that I'm writing is not stuff that I would pick up to read. So then I thought, well, okay, why are you writing stuff that you don't want to read? And I think it's because I'm trying to write through this kind of vein of realism to get back into the voice that I had many years ago, but with a sharper sense of characterization and with more of a purpose behind it. I think in the past I was just doing all this play and this kind of experimentation to show off how much I knew or show off my style. And so I swung the pendulum when you and I really started this effort. I swung the pendulum the other way, and I'm like, nope, it's all about the characters, and we're gonna go right down the middle of the fairway. And even though what I'm writing is like more competent, it's more capable, it's not boring, but it's not the kind of stuff that I get really excited about. So I went back and I read a bunch of my old fiction, and it got me excited because the form was really interesting, and it got me really sad because the characters were just stupid. It's just so stupid. So I'm going to stop talking now, and I'm going to ask you to chime in and tell me, fix me, Tim, fix me.
Wow, you're really tapping into all of the wrong reasons why I got into relationships way back in the 90s, zeros, and teens. I'm going to fix her. Oh, God, Tim. There's always the writer that we want to be. And I think that I think that's a good place to be. And you and I especially have gone through a lot of our old work of the writers that we were. And there tends to be on my side a bit of impatience. I have been really struggling myself to finish a piece. I have like 10 pieces that I'm really excited about, and I want them all to be perfect in my voice right away, right now, so I could send them out and then be Edgar Carret and, be like, I'm such a great writer. But it just takes time. And that's the worst part about it, is that it's the work and it's the process. And I think that for me personally, this sort of TikTokization of things, let me phrase what I mean by that. It makes it seem like when you watch a little 30-second video, you can redo your bathroom in 30 seconds. And it's the real, and then you're like, well, oh, I see what they did there. I can go and do that. That looks really easy. And then you do it and you're like on your second week of redoing your bathroom and you're like, what the hell? So I am susceptible to that, to wanting to get it done quick, wanting to have the voice that I feel like I have immediately and getting it out there and getting the validation of a publication or, the validation of someone saying, hey, I really like this. And so I know that we've both struggled with that because you, in your history and the stuff that I've read before when we first met in college and all of those things, those were very different. And now you are digging, you're working through this vein of realism. And I just think that, for lack of a better term, the only way out is through. And it is more writing to find out where that spot is in the realism that takes you into the style that gets you excited.
Yeah.
And that's what's been very difficult for me. I haven't been able to find the time, and that's what's killing me right now, is that I just wish that I was independently wealthy so that I didn't have to worry about a job, so I could sit there and say, I'm going to focus 3 hours of my day on this. I'm going to write through it, because this phase, that I'm going through, it might take another year, another 2 years, depending on how much time I can give to it. So I think it's a daunting thing to say, you feel more competent as a writer.
Yes.
Right? You mentioned that.
Yeah.
But the things that you're writing, you wouldn't pick up off the shelf and buy and take home and read. Then I think it's just more like, all right, well then keep writing through it and find those alleys. I've talked before about a conversation I had, an interview that I was very fortunate to have for a newspaper with Vernon Reid, guitar player, Grammy award-winning guitar player for Grammy award-winning Living Colour. And he said, improvisation is going headlong down an alley that looks like a dead end, but it's not until you get to the end of the alley that you realize there's a way right, there's a turn left, there's another way to get out of it. And so I think that's what is the easiest yet most difficult thing to say, which is you just got to keep going and go down those pathways. Yeah. And when you sense that moment where a thought comes into your head of saying, oh, you know what? Wait a minute. I have an idea. What if I started to do this and writing down this pathway? And that's only going to lead you, because you need to tune into that part of yourself that knows where those pathways lie within the forest. Yeah. You're walking along and it's like, wait a minute, that light down that way is where I want to head. And it's just about capturing that and keeping open to that.
Yeah, I guess, as a younger guy, I was trying to do a pastiche of Donald Barthelme, because he was one of those guys I picked up and read and I thought, oh my God, this is exactly what I want to do. I just want to be this guy. And I mean, not knowing anything about him or what informed his work or why he was writing what he was writing. I meant just in form and style, the way that his sentences, the cadence they had, the brevity of his short stories. I didn't like his novels as much. And it's because he wrote the novels, in my opinion, in the same style as the short stories. And even though his novels were very short novels, I mean, by necessity, it's just a dense writing style. And I had a conversation with a friend of mine recently, and we were talking about this, and he said, yeah, if you wrote a novel in the style of your short stories, it would be exhausting. Like, I don't know if that's a good idea. I'm like, yeah, no, I agree. I agree. And so I guess because we started off with novels, maybe that's why I flexed to realism and to kind of a simpler, more straightforward, not simpler, but a more straightforward approach, because we were trying to work on something large. But of course, I don't have the stamina for that yet. And so I pivoted back to short stories, but I kept the same sensibility of let's be real straightforward. Let's be realistic. Let's focus on character. And yeah, when I say stuff like, oh, I wouldn't pick that up off the shelf, what I mean is that I am attracted to things that are odd. And they still have to be well done and compelling in order to maintain my interest. But I want something that's kind of a jagged rock on a cliff. And you're like, oh, that's a cool thing. And then you pick it up and start looking at it. So with fiction, it's the same thing. I remember this. I don't remember the name of the book, but there was this book at like a used bookstore. And I picked it up, and the first maybe 10 pages or so was this kind of wild stream of consciousness, dreamlike state. And it was amazing. Like this guy was going everywhere, and the prose was good. And I'm like, oh yeah, this is it. So I bought the book, for like $1 or whatever, whatever it was back then. And I read another 40 or 50 pages. And when I got closer to the midpoint of the book, it really started to fall apart. Like this guy could not sustain what he had set up. It's that old line from Top Gun. You're writing checks your body can't cash. It's like basically the same concept where it's like you're setting up this amazing thing and you can't pay it off. So that was super disappointing. So I worry about that. Like I've got a story called the Second Arc that I don't know what the hell it's about, and it's a story I've reworked maybe 10 times. Most recently, probably 10 years ago. I haven't touched it in a long time, but it has one of the best opening paragraphs I've ever written. It just doesn't make a lot of sense. And whenever I would come back to this thing, in fact, I'm going to dig it up real quick. I'll read it into the record. Here it is. This is the first paragraph of the second arc from way back when. It isn't the water we're scared of. Even though the ocean is new, springing up in massive waves like a great basin had burst in the sky, we still drop Biddy Wilson's clock radio, tied to our only length of rope, into the flat waste of green water, searching for submerged cities. We cannot talk about what truly scares us. Biddy Wilson's clock radio has not scraped the top of a building in 12 days. And that's the first paragraph. So like it sets up something that is potentially very compelling. You've got people kind of, shipwrecked or alone and isolated on a vessel. What caused this flooding? Where are they? Who are they? Like, what the hell's going on? Clearly they're in trouble. So it like sets up a lot of interesting stuff. What does that mean? Hell if I know, and then, so I wrote it a few different times back in college, actually in graduate school. And the few times that I was able to kind of hit were these dreamlike states. And so some of the passages were very compelling because they were dreamlike. But then whenever I tried to like apply reason to the story, it showcased its flaws. It's almost like, when you've got that really pretty blue light that they use in movies and it makes everybody's skin look perfect and whatnot. And then, so that's like the dreamlike state. Everybody looks great.
Yeah.
And then you throw the light and you put that like harsh white fluorescence. So it's like lights, boom. And then that's where I'm trying to be realistic. And it's like, no, this doesn't work. Like one time, I think I had tried to explain all that stuff away as a fever dream. And my classmates are like, God, make that stop. Make it go away. That's terrible. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. It is terrible. That first paragraph is one of the best examples of what I would like my work to be. It's weird. It's straightforward, but it's weird, and it sets up something that is potentially life-threatening, potentially very compelling, potentially very difficult. And That's kind of where I need to be going. And that story was written in vignettes. So it was like probably, let me think, 20 to 25 vignettes that were kind of stitched together. And there were 4 people on this boat. And it sort of, played with this there was a real element of sexual danger on the boat because Biddy Wilson was the only woman on the boat and she was becoming increasingly threatened. So, I mean, there was a lot at risk. It had some good stuff going on. I just never could make it work. So, yay. All right, Tim.
Well,
you're up. Fix me.
I think a couple things. I think one of the nicest things to hear that you're saying, is the writing that I'm doing isn't something that I would pick up. You mentioned that. And I think, and I know that we sort of, that's oversimplifying it, but I think the strength in that is that you are writing for yourself and holding yourself to a standard. Whereas I have been like, I need to write for this lit mag, and trying to sort of craft something for other people instead of being all right with it myself. My favorite pieces that I've been able to write are ones where I feel like that's exactly the voice I want. So I think that's a real positive because I think that's very difficult to do, to try and live to other, to try and keep up with the proverbial Joneses. And you're saying this isn't something that I want. So I think that's a real positive. And I think people should try and take a look at that, especially, writers who are probably dealing with the same sort of issues that we are, and, aren't Joyce Carol Oates. The other thing is, I mean, I know we've talked about the second arc a lot, and I'm not saying during this podcast, but we've talked about it, ever since we've been in college. And sometimes it reminds me when I used to talk about that short story, and we've talked about that here, Patrice and I Take Over the World, where I was like, going back to it and reworking, I was like, I think I've got some good ideas. So about the second arc, the first thing is I hear the first paragraph and I'm like, yeah, that's fine. Why not? Just submit that. That's perfect. That you've got a great piece of microfiction.
Oh my God.
I got about 3 lit mags that you could send that to. 3 lit mags you could send that to, and that's going to be. And I'm frustrated, and I'm very jealous of how good that sounds. But the other thing I wonder, there is this sort of, this sort of like, it almost seems like a wistfulness or a sentimentality for this writing that you did and feeling how strong it was. So I only ask this as a completely objective question. Do you think that you're holding yourself to too much of a standard of that piece, of the second arc? There's something in there that you love. Was saying that it was a fever dream an easier way to say, I like this writing, fuck off?
No, maybe I misspoke.
If that makes sense.
It does. I think I may not have expressed myself clearly. When I said it was a fever dream, it wasn't a metaphor. In the story, I explained it away as a fever dream that character was experiencing. Yeah. It wasn't me. Yeah, it wasn't me being sort of metaphorically wistful. It was me saying I'm trying to logically thread these disparate elements together, and this is the logical framework that I'm providing. What do you think? And my classmates were like, that was no good. And they were right, dude. They were 100% right. And I knew they were right. And as soon as they started saying it, I'm like, damn it. I've done it again. I've given people something to ridicule. I've done it again.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's just because I felt like, and you and I have had this exact conversation before over the last 30 years, is that, I keep trying to apply rational thought. Remember in Patrice, and I told you, hey, why is the power still running? And you're like, what do you mean? I'm like, well, it's been, a year or whatever, and the power's still running? Like, that's not going to happen. You should fix that. And recently, I think when we talked about it lately, I'm like, don't fix that. That was a stupid comment. Like, you're good.
Yeah. But I mean, but that's the sort of thing where I also like to write these sort of, fabulous sort of, I'm going to use all the wrong terms because I'm stupid, these sort of metaphorical, these allegorical stories, where I would, as a young writer, I would say, but that's not important. We're dealing with these characters and they mean so much. And it's like, yeah, I get it. But I was too inexperienced at that time to try and do something that would be what I wanted to be. I mean, and I
Yeah.
know I was aspiring to be a writer that could do that, but I didn't have enough experience. And I also didn't read enough writers who were doing that. I was just like, oh, what if, I have a story and they're the last two people on earth, and one person is like materialism and the other one's like transcendental, some college
Right.
horse poop that I was in. And so I apologize ahead of time for this. You can skip ahead to the next time Art speaks in this podcast. But I kind of always go back to David Lynch in these situations. Like, you can go see David Lynch, and I have a bunch of friends of mine, and I was the same way, where late 90s, and I'm like, Lost Highway, what are you doing? Like, stop trying to be smarter than me. Stop trying to be smarter than me. I hate this movie maker. I don't like it. It's too weird. It's too out there. And then I saw The Straight Story by David Lynch, which is a very beautiful, simple story. And then I went backwards and I saw The Elephant Man. And I was like, wait a minute, hold on a second. So this guy isn't like a snobby art person. He knows what he's doing. And then the more I learned about him, he's doing it because this is his creativity. This is him just doing art. This is him being playful. This is him, tuning into himself as a creative artist. And then, of course, somebody showed me Twin Peaks, and, I was very late to the game on that in the late 90s. And it's my favorite thing in the entire face of the earth. And you can't tell me otherwise. I love it more than Star Wars and Star Trek. But, so it's that sort of like lean into it, because you were a big fan of Donald Barthelme, and I think when we come into writing classes like that, there are so many different kinds of folks there, and how many of them are still writing, I don't know. How many of them have gone on to to a place where they are authorities on the subject, and what is an authority on the subject? Who knows? But the things that you tune into, I can guarantee that the way that you were writing in college is something that folks remembered than, say, what I was doing, which was much more basic, if that makes sense. Your creativity and your art, doing, no pun intended, art, your being as most Arthur Franz IV you could be, you really took on something that you like to do, and you were doing it. I understand that we've talked about times when your mom said, well, I don't get it. And you had to explain that one, it's this sentence. And it's like, well, who's going to get that? Yes, those things we all tried to do as not young writers, but more inexperienced writers. We all want to try and be like the folks that inspire us. And it just takes time to get there. And so right now, you've done all of this wonderful work that is the writing that you like. And now you're like, well, I'm in a different phase right now. Just lean into it. Just lean into the realism and find those spots in that realism that brings you back into the excitement, And it's very tough to do because, I mean, I've been there myself. I'm like, who the hell am I writing this for? What would happen here to make me interested in this? How would that happen? And so I think that it's always disappointing when you're not coming up with snake eyes. Bad metaphor because I don't know how gambling works. I think sometimes when you come up with stuff that's not, you're like, ugh, and you just have to let it die. Like, there are stories, I've got so many little itty bitty bits of stories that I'm like, why can't I make this work? Why can't I make that work? Why can't I make those work? I got to give it up. There's a lot of stuff that I like maybe think, man, maybe I just need to put it aside and start fresh, because I have always looked back at older stories and said, you know what? Wait a minute. I think I know how to take care of this. I wrote this 25 years ago. Maybe not. Maybe. But also, maybe not.
I appreciate,
so lean into it.
Yeah, I appreciate what you're telling me, and I don't disagree. I guess if I had to kind of wave a wand and poof it into existence, what I really liked about Donald Barthelme's work was it felt crackling with possibility. And it felt like the angle at which he would look at something was askew. Like it was just a way that I would never have thought to think about things. What I disliked about his work, and I disliked it a little bit back in the day because I was kind of explaining that away. I was really enamored with the style. But I disliked the substance of it. Like, I don't think I understood what he was trying to accomplish. And I really wanted more out of the characters, because many of the books that I kind of point back to and go, this book is great, are books where the characters are front and center and they do compelling things. And it's really, exciting to see them do it. And that's just not the way I remember Barthelme's work. It just, like, the people were almost not props, but they weren't fully realized people. And I think that was part of his point and his style, for what he was doing. Again, I don't pretend to be an expert. I'm just remembering the way that I encountered that work, which is probably why the novels didn't really check the boxes for me. The one book he had called Snow White was kind of a play on the children's story, and really, I think more kind of poking fun at the Disney version of that, if I remember. So you kind of had to have some framework from the outside world to then bring to see what he was doing to subvert, what was happening in the outside world. And I kind of think that's what he was doing, because he was publishing in the New Yorker a lot. And so you've got this sort of general sensibility from people reading his work of what's happening in the world, and especially in New York, right? So it's like, what's going on? And then he's writing this thing that kind of undercuts it. The one that made the most sense to me, and I don't remember the name of the story, but it was from the point of view of a guy who works in a missile silo. And he was paranoid, talking about the other guy who works in the missile silo. And it was about whether or not they're going to fire their missiles. And you come to find out that they haven't heard from the outside world in an uncomfortably long period of time. And that regulations, say that they need to fire the rocket and it's a nuclear missile. They have to fire this thing if they haven't heard from people in a while, is at least the way I remember it. But it was really chilling because I had the context of what that was about. So I kind of, whereas many of his other pieces like City Life and other things that are well regarded, I just didn't know what the hell was going on in 1970 when he wrote City Life. Like, I don't know, New York in 1970. I have no idea. So I read City Life and I have nothing to compare it to. So I just read it for what it is. And I'm like, these characters suck. But the writing was great. But having an idea of, okay, we're in the middle of the Cold War and it is serious. People are living with the threat of nuclear annihilation every morning they wake up. So this thing makes total sense in that space. So anyway, I think if I could wave a wand, poof my work into existence, it would have the style and sensibility of what I was trying to do as a younger guy in response to how Barthelme kind of shaped up the world when he was writing. Because it was very spare, but also kind of insightful and cutting almost in a way, but then have real characters who are up against real stuff. It felt almost like those stories, the characters were stand-ins for ideas more so than they were real people. And I kind of would rather have real people. But I was too chicken shit. I'm just going to say it. I was too scared to use my own personal experience to inform characters because I was afraid people would recognize themselves in the work. So I just didn't do it, chose not to do it. And as a result, my fiction really would never able to get past that surface layer. And I wondered, in the 20 years since, I've wondered, did I purposely choose a hero, a literary hero, who seemed to allow me the excuse to not dive deep into my own personal stuff? Like, is that why I like him? Because it was an excuse to not look under the hood. So in the last year or so, as we've been trying to do this work, I've sort of thrown away the old framework and said, all right, now all we're doing is looking under the hood, period. End of discussion. Crack that puppy open and let's see what's going on. And what's coming out is all realism. And so it's just now when I kind of take my head out of the car and go, this isn't even a car I would fucking drive. Like, why am I doing this? And so I think I'm at that crossroads. I'm at that moment in my life where it's like, do you Do you really want to have the style that you had cultivated as a younger person, which was exciting and got you publications that you were proud of? Or do you, and I'm not even going to finish answering a question. The answer is yes. That's what I want. So I really want to not be like everybody else in however that means. And I feel like when I write realism, it's indistinguishable from what else is out there. Like it's all the same.
Yeah.
And I don't want to be that.
Of course. Of course. And I don't think that there's an artist in the world that wants to be sort of figured as being like normal or part of, just sort of like blasé, stock, I think was the big term that Metallica used in that documentary, stock, just very like plain Jane. But I mean, I would offer a third option. I don't think it has to be a crossroads for you to choose either one. I think it's you, digging just blending the two, getting the two in there. If the realism is something that's sort of drawing you to it, it doesn't have to be a crossroads. You don't have to make a choice between the two if you enjoy both. Of course, if you decide I don't like realism and you want to go in the other direction, that's fine. If you decide I like realism and maybe I don't want to go in there, that's fine as well. But I feel like you are interested in both. And so I would just offer the third option. It's possible that you're putting too many guardrails on something. And it's like, fucking put the pedal to the metal and just have at it. Like, have at it. Try it. See what happens. And that's the thing, too, is like, let's just work in, the rest of this summer failing at seeing what that's like so that you can find out where those places are in that failure that are pulling you in that third direction of maybe having a little bit of both.
So there was a story that you wrote that I really wanted to commend you on, and I don't remember the name of it, but I'm sure you do, but it's the one about the guy who eats documents. Which story was that?
Must Love Eating.
Right. That story is fantastic. And I remember reading that, and it was one of those moments where it's like, damn, I wish my name were on this story. Like, I loved it that much. And because the way that you approach that story is similar to what I think I'm trying to do, which is the blending of the realism and something else. It's not that I want the prose to be fabulous or unrealistic or, dreamlike. That's not really what I'm saying. It's that I don't want the narrative to feel like a slog, a linear, this could happen to you next Tuesday kind of event. I want it to be more fantastic, without it being like genre fantasy or genre science fiction or whatever. But I just want it to be kind of surreal almost. Maybe it's surreal is what I'm looking for. But I loved that story because it had that exact element. Everything that was happening was quote unquote realistic. But when you started to stitch these things together, it became, almost like a big fish kind of story, and the fish was this big, and it's all this crazy stuff is happening. That was a great story, man. You did great work there.
Oh, I really appreciate that. Thank you very much. Goodness gracious. It's so strange. We've had so much time together and I've gotten so much good, feedback from you. And rarely, I think, any of the feedback we get is, this is it. Well done. Because we're like,
right.
It's always, it's always works in progress. It's always stuff that's here. It's always, at that maybe one or two more edits. But having you said, that's very kind of you, Art. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I remember when you had me read that story, I think it had already been accepted for publication. You were just kind of sharing it after the fact. And I'm like, oh yeah, I can see why they took this. It's really good. So, yeah, it's good stuff. So, I mean, that's something I'm shooting for. And I think at this point, it's really just about, hey, you've made the decision to lean into characterization more. Great. That's the right thing to do. You've also recognized that maybe you swung the pendulum a little too far towards just straight narrative realism, which you find boring. Even if it's executed well, you find it boring. Okay, well then find that middle ground. So I think you're right. There is a sort of give and take, and I just need to find that exact spot. But like I look at the books that I really love, and my favorite novels, The Great Gatsby, that's straight realism. Like there's nothing weird
Yep.
about that book. But then you talk about The Master and Margarita, which I mentioned in a refill recently, and The Master and Margarita is not realistic at all. It has that kind of magical realism, fabulism thing, whatever you want to call it. Um, and it's wonderful. John Gardner's Grendel is another book that I really
Oh yeah.
appreciated from way back when. And that is a straightforward narrative, but the activities that are going on in it are clearly, mythic in scope and aren't realistic, but the way it's presented is written as realism. So it's that kind of tension, that tug of war between the way the story is presented and what is happening. There needs to be kind of an edge to that, a tug of war there. And so if I'm presenting realistic information in a traditional realistic way, there's no tension there. And so I find it dull. So I just need to find a way to kind of, you know, pull those levers a little differently so that there's enough narrative suspense that I'm compelled.